I've been sat down all day, so.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time. We'll get started. We're going to talk today a little bit about autonomy through standards, and not just standards, but also interoperability a little bit. And so my name is Austin Gellings. I'm the Director of Agriculture, but I'm not here who you're here to listen to. I've got a great group of panelists up here with me who I'll let introduce themselves here. And so we'll start with you, Andrew, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Andrew Olliver. I'm an employee of CNH, so Case New Holland for some people who don't know the acronym. But I'm actually here today as part of a role I have with a volunteer organization called the AEF, so the Agricultural Industry Electronics Foundation. And I'm here today with that hat on, so anything I say can be interpreted as an AEF opinion and not a CNH opinion. Okay?
Sounds good. And next, Andrew, we've got Mike Gomes.
Sure thing. So I'm the Californian of the panelists. I think that's how I got invited today. My name is Mike Gomes. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability and Global CSR for a company called Topcon Positioning Systems. So we're headquartered in Livermore, California, where we have about 400 of our 2,000 employees. And if you've never heard of our company, we manufacture the sensors and pieces of the solutions for machine control that enable automation and increasingly digitization for both the construction industry as well as for the agricultural industry. So in the construction side, that's things like 2- and 3-dimensional controls for bulldozer, motor grader, excavator, paver. In the ag space, that's things like GPS auto steering, the in-cab consoles for variable rate application, boom height control, weighing, yield monitoring, the Digistar mixer feeders, those kinds of things. And so our representation is elements of hardware as well as software, and we serve a number of the OEMs, as well as we also have an aftermarket business. So we've got one foot in both sides of that.
Thank you, Mike. And then last but certainly not least, Adam Barlow.
Yes, hello, Adam Barlow with John Deere. I'm the manager of technology standards and regulatory affairs for some of our ag precision technologies. We are here this week with See and Spray Ultimate out there in the demonstration area, showcasing some work that we're doing in standards with policymakers around precision applications. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And with that, we'll jump right into the conversation. And so, up on the screen, it says autonomy through standards. And so what is the importance of the industry coming together to create these standards? And what's that process kind of look like for the industry to come together and do that? Adam, maybe I'll kick it over to you to get us started.
Yeah, I think standard development really starts here in the U.S. with ASABE. So the American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers is our standardization body, and so we work together through industry to create usable standards. So some of the work I do is with new technology, but there's a lot of safety standards that we utilize in ag and construction equipment, and getting together as an industry to try to align on, okay, what's the base level of safety that these systems, that these technologies should be capable of providing. And so some of the work that we're trying to do with policymakers is, at the end of the day, a standard is a voluntary standard, but we can take those standards and work with government and actually turn those into a regulatory standard or a regulation. It's similar to some of the processes you see with ISO in the European Union. So there are a lot of standards over there that if you say that you, as a design, as a system, comply with that standard, they consider that a presumption of conformity to their directive. So at that point, that becomes law in Europe. So we do a lot of the similar work here in the States, but try to utilize us being as an industry, bringing together manufacturers, academia groups, and policymakers to kind of align on what we want to try to do and make it safe and usable for not only our growers and customers, but for us as OEMs as well.
Perfect. Anybody else have something to add? Otherwise, Adam, you may have captured that perfectly.
Yeah, I'd sort of like to add something that there are standards bodies. So under ISO, yes, that's a standards organization. And then there are, if you like, regional mirror committees that contribute to what's happening in ISO. And so ASABE is one, and in Europe we have an organization in Germany called DIN, who's another mirror committee. So it's these mirror committees who are actually contributing to the formation of standards. At the same time, you also have organizations like the AEM in North America and CEMA in Europe. And these are organizations which represent ag equipment manufacturers to the politicians. So AEM has offices in Washington. AEM has a strong voice towards the people on Capitol Hill. And in the same way in Europe, CEMA represents the European ag manufacturers in Europe. They have offices in Brussels, and they're actively lobbying to the European Parliament. And the beauty of these organizations is that if they get any whiff or idea of a direction that the politicians are thinking about going in or investigating, then it means that these organizations can rally us or organize us as industries to say, hey, I think the politicians are going in this direction. We as an industry need to be prepared. Let's start working on something. And essentially that something ends up, becoming a standard. And a standard is a way to show that we as an industry agree that, these are common things that we can all follow. And it's a way of showing that the policymakers that we do actually work together, and by creating a standard, we can actually create something which we can all follow. Unfortunately, if we leave it to the policymakers or the regulators to define something for us, sometimes that can mean a lot of work on our end to actually comply with that. So we've got standards bodies, and then we've got these, if you like, industry groups that really represent us to the regulators, and both, if you like, groups go hand in hand.
I think it's also worth talking a little bit about is that from the perception of the industry, a lot of times people think, well, you're all competitors. Why would you ever want to work together, right? And my easiest explanation of that is that a rising tide raises all boats, right? More of us are about making a market or creating a market as these industries, and I think this conference is a great example, but as you see industries go from manual to mechanization to automation, and increasingly from automation to digitization, it takes a lot of coordination, right? And the other thing is that we also see a number of companies here that are interested to sell things, right? And so standards enable you to meet a global marketplace, and that's a big deal. Yeah. Right? Because that expands the potential for you to sell your products as, and because even if you're going after, for example, a niche market like almonds or pistachios or walnuts, and you say, well, but that's an international crop. Okay, it is, but now then, all right, what are you doing for Australia? What are you doing for the US? If you're going to South America or if you're going to Europe, because the rules in those areas are all different, and so it's our responsibility as manufacturers to be able to create products that can be sold globally, and so really it's an element of coordination. And so when you see guys like us up on these panels, we're more often interested in helping an industry to grow, is why we spend more time in this rather than trying to learn how to needle this one or that one type of thing, I would say.
Make the industry grow and make it safer at the end of the day, I think is the common theme there, and coming together to do so. But when you look at the standards kind of landscape, sometimes it can be a little daunting. There's a lot going on. And can you guys maybe talk to just a little bit about what each of your organizations are doing as it relates to standards, what areas you guys are involved in, and what work's going on? And Mike, maybe I'll start with you and let you pick up.
Sure thing. So, for example, as a company, one of the first things you begin, as a product managers have to begin to think of what standards apply to us and which ones don't, right? And then how that begins to work. In many cases, a number of the agricultural implements, and I apologize, we're headed for an alphabet soup of letters and numbers, but on the agricultural side, This ISO standard 11783 really, that's a great example of major tractor manufacturers had an ISO 11783 connector on the back of a tractor in 2009. And how does that standard actually helps to reduce cost? Because now that means that every time a farmer goes to buy a particular implement, he doesn't have to have a different display. Now you have elements of a universal display, right? As long as you have the connectivity, and then organizations like the AEF validate to make sure that what you say really does work, kind of thing.
Well, I think that's a really good lead-in, Andrew, to some of the work that the AEF is doing there, as Mike had mentioned, around interoperability and the importance that it holds within the industry. So can you maybe talk a little bit about what AEF is doing and why that's important?
Yeah, so, I mean, Mike mentioned Isobus, which is a really good, if you like, lead-in. So Isobus as a standard was kind of talked about in the late 90s. The first, if you like, the first release under ISO of the standard 11783 was in the early 2000s. And it was kind of viewed as the holy grail, that the idea of Isobus is it's a standardized CAN bus, it's standardized electronic communication. So this bus that would run between the tractor and any implement that you had connected to the back. And what that meant was that with the Isobus, with the display in the cab, you could control any Isobus implement on the back of the tractor with that same display. And it was kind of viewed as, okay, this is great. This will allow, precision farming to actually start growing, this common way of operating electronics. But the standard was worked out. Thanks to ISO, it was released. But what we sort of found in the early 2000s was that everybody was following the standard. Tractor manufacturers were developing displays according to the standard. Implement manufacturers were developing implement electronics according to the standard. But when they plugged them together, that interoperability wasn't actually seen. There were more times problems than actual systems working in the field. And so that kind of led the ag industry to come together in the sort of, the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, and start discussions to say, how can we actually address this issue? How can we make this standard 11783 better? And that really led to the need for the formation of this organization called the AEF, the Agricultural Industry Electronics Foundation, which was formed in 2008. And it was formed by 7 of the main ag equipment manufacturers, CNH and John Deere were 2 of those companies. And they said, okay, let's create a volunteer organization that can come together and investigate technical issues on the Isobus and work out how they can be solved. And that's really how the AEF functions. So we have technical teams made up of volunteer engineers from our organization. They investigate issues on the Isobus, and they document a resolution to those in documents which we call AEF guidelines, which are available to all our members to use. The idea being that if you're developing anything that works on the Isobus, you read the standard ISO 11783, you read the equivalent AEF guideline, and by following both documents together, you can then actually develop a product which is compatible on the Isobus, which allows our customers, our farmers, to have the interoperability which they expect when they plug an Isobus system together. So really the AEF, we're not a standards body unlike ISO and the ASABE and DIN, etc. However, we investigate technical problems related to Isobus or related in general to ag compatibility, and then we release documents for our members to follow so that they can overcome incompatibility issues.
Perfect. Adam, anything from your end that you want to add? And know with how engaged you are in the standards world and being out here representing some of the work you're doing there, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think some of the work that we're doing in standards is kind of around data and data transfer between company to company that's usable data that it kind of looks consistent. So there's a group, the Technical Committee 347 through ASABE, that's kind of putting together this high-level data plan of what should be usable from all of these different manufacturing entities and how we're going to use that. Some of my work right now with EPA is I sit on the Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee, where we are discussing opportunities to take pesticide labels and make those electronic. So data is going to be a big part of that. And so what, as OEMs, do we need to be that we are comfortable with sharing that can be standardized from a data set to be able to use in basically this new pesticide label, describing what type of technology you have, what type of pesticide you're applying, where you are at geospatially, so it can play into where they have the restricted use mapping. So a lot of that work is kind of led through standards. And so trying to maintain alignment with all of us OEMs is critical in that endeavor.
Perfect. And so we've talked a lot about standards. We've talked a little bit about interoperability. But the title of this is autonomy through these things. So how do these things come together to help enable autonomy in the field? And I'll open it up to the group to answer that one.
I guess when I begin to think about that, Andrew, you might want to talk a little bit about how TIM, Tractor Implement Management, right? And so this was, it was first commercially, the standard took a few years to develop, 2 or 3 years, and then.
Yeah, 2019 it was first available.
Right, it was
November.
first available.
Yep.
And so, but basically that's an example of, by following this standard, it's the data from the implement can control the forward speed of the tractor. And it was prototyped around a baler, but you begin to think of how that might fit for a weeder or a sprayer, right, out there, and you can begin to see. And so I think that to me is an easy example of how elements of some of these standards begin to map into the road to autonomy type of thing.
Yeah, I think, my former role was more in the product safety side of things and working a lot around the safety standards. So there are some existing standards today that we utilize for autonomy, one of those being ISO 18497. There's several parts through that, but it does kind of standardize the lighting and marking on this product, the alert system to signify when you move from a manual state to a semi-autonomous state into a full autonomy state. It talks about, if you want to do a perception test, right, to evaluate your LiDAR, your camera systems, it specifies specific objects that you should use to do those tests and show that you can comply with that standard. So that standard itself is continuing to evolve as technology and autonomy continues to change. But I think it's adamant that folks and of course folks with the government too are aware of the standards work that's ongoing to ensure that there's a baseline safety performance level for these types of full autonomy, semi-autonomy, partial autonomy type systems. There's also, we do a lot of work with functional safety in a lot of these systems. So trying to understand, one controller communicating to another. Nobody wants a single point failure that's a catastrophic failure. So this ISO 25119 is the standard for ag equipment. ISO 26262 would be the automotive parent standard to that. But basically it's a process standard. You go through and you risk assess your system, your design, whether you're a supplier or whether you're an OEM, you follow that process standard and you kind of deliver on those metrics. And then you can use that to show compliance to say inherently this design is safe because it complies with an industry agreed upon standard.
So Mike mentioned TIM, which stands for Tractor Implement Management, which a lot of you might know previously is ISOBUS Class 3. And the idea is that the implement, if it has enough electronics, if it has enough, if you like, sensors and thinking power, computing power on it, can actually control the tractor functions. It can control the forward speed of the tractor. It could steer the tractor left or right based on trying to follow the swath or some other indication on the ground. It can control the tractor hydraulics, the PTO, the rear hitch, etc. And the idea behind TIM is that if you like, it's an evolution up from auto guidance. So, when auto guidance first came out, it was fantastic. You could program in your way lines at the start of the row. You just push the engage button, the tractor finds the row and it drives, and you don't have to concentrate on driving straight. When you then add TIM on top of that, you're actually saying to the implement, okay, if you've got the brain power, you can control your operation. You can tell the tractor where to go. You can tell the tractor to go faster or slower depending on how much crop you want coming into the bale chamber, for example. So TIM is like another level towards autonomy, which is fantastic. You know, it's fantastic for the industry. It means the driver can do less. Obviously, one of the things about a TIM system is it's still actually designed to have an operator in the seat. And again, that's based on the fact that we're trying to follow ISO 25119 and some other standard, which is 151 something something.
Yes.
I can never remember that one. But yeah, so the point is that the TIM today is designed to, you know, always have an operator present in the system. And obviously we've realized that, you know, ISOBUS in itself is actually quite, it's quite useful having this common canvas, having this common language that runs between tractors and implements. And so from the AEF side, we finally decided, we took that decision late last year, that we should actually create another project team to focus on autonomy. We'd actually been obviously watching all the industry groups, industry organizations that exist around the world, and we'd noticed that, you know, everybody seemed to be forming a group to focus on autonomy. And we thought, we don't just want to do that just because it's the trend. We don't want to do that because it seems to be the fashion to create a group focusing on autonomy. So we kind of took a bit of time and got some feedback from our members and had a couple of workshops and invited various groups from the industry to sort of come and present to us. And in the end, finally last year, we decided, yes, there is a need for us to create an autonomy team. And basically that need comes from the fact that, as I mentioned, we have ISOBUS, we have this common, if you like, electronic language that everybody in the industry is following, you know, in some respects when they want to have interoperability. But ISOBUS in itself, there's good functionality on there, but a lot of the things don't actually, they mean it can't quite be used for autonomy. So we formed this team to actually look at the autonomous, if you like, ecosystem, some type of, you know, power unit and implement running in the field, more than one power unit and implement running in the field, etc. But field operations based on a power unit and an implement. And we said, okay, let's look at that ecosystem. Let's try and look at which of the interfaces which should be standardized in that ecosystem, and which are the ones that should be left alone to protect manufacturers' IP. So we've got this team that they're working on this. They're looking at this at the moment. And then once they've worked out what are the interfaces which should be standardized, then we look at existing ISOBUS functionalities that we have, such as TIM, and we see how can we evolve the TIM functionality to be used in an autonomous application. So really the idea behind this team is that we want to try and reuse existing standards where possible, maybe enhance them a little bit to suit autonomous operation, but then where something doesn't exist, then we know, okay, it doesn't exist or it can't be enhanced. Then we know we need to sort of break a new boundary and create a new team to work on standardizing that piece. So, yeah, so that's something which is going on in the AEF since sort of March this year, and it's been quite impressive. I mean, I've been involved in the AEF for quite a few years now. And typically we form a new project team where there's a request coming from the industry for where there is an incompatibility issue. But I've never seen any team with so much support and moving as fast as this autonomy team at the moment. There are a couple of people here in the audience who actually are participating in this team, and I've also sort of picked up from them that they're also surprised at the speed with which this team is working.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so I'm going to divert a little bit off course here, and we've kind of touched on this throughout the conversation a little bit, but as you guys mentioned at the beginning, here comes the alphabet soup. We've mentioned ASABE, ISO, AEF, DIN. Can you guys maybe just talk a little bit to how all these organizations kind of come together to work together, and what those relationships look like, and what kind of the responsibilities are a little bit, just to kind of frame up, right, what's that look like just a little bit. Hopefully that wasn't too too much of a curveball?
Well, I'll start it from the independent side, right?
Yeah.
And it's the idea that it's a lot of coordination, right? And so there's a lot of startups out in our audience and at this conference, and so it can be pretty overwhelming, right? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And so it's very much a step-by-step approach of how you want to get started. And so I would think that it's look at the business problem you're solving and then begin to understand what are the standards that fit most closely to that, and how does that fit to the business opportunity that you're headed for, right? How is it that by meeting this standard, I'm going to be able to sell more and make more money, right? Because it's all about the business side. And so being able to show that, right? So from the coordination standpoint, I think that there's a huge amount of work if you ever go to a Commodity Classic, if you ever go to a Plug Fest, and you begin to see the elements of the behind the scenes work that goes on in our industry for coordination, right? For the ability for tractors and implements to work together. And we don't do it altruistically. We do it because that increases the market. That raises the tide that enables the world to go from mechanization to automation, automation to digitization.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think, when a lot of times you talk with startups or folks that they're not aware that these standards exist. I know having conversations with regulatory folks around some of these safety of autonomy standards, they're not aware that they exist and the work that goes into that. The purpose of this standard is that we as an industry can come together, have this baseline, safety of our systems. And so something's not going to a market that causes a problem that's going to affect everybody else, right? So having that engagement and getting in close with the folks that are in these standards. I know from my aspect with starting a new standard around precision application, it's really trying to talk with a lot of these new startups. A couple of them are here today, Solimtech, Verdant, right? Meeting them at commodity shows and talking through, understanding their systems, and they're on board with us with this standard, and they're helping us guide this because they understand what this means to put that product on a market. So I think just trying to get engaged, reach out to us. Obviously, we have folks here that we could get you in contact with if you want to learn more about standard development, ways to get engaged. But it's the benefit, I think, is it's really good to continue to grow this market with autonomy and get into more of that space.
I think it's also worth saying that the world is run by those who show up. And so the biggest thing is in a lot of these things is that these are volunteer efforts. And so if you find that something fits your industry or fits where you're headed in your product architecture, you may want to reach out, right, and begin to engage with us, because there is a ton of this information, right? There are man years of work and development that have gone into this that you may or may not be aware of.
And just, if you like, the sort of back to your question of how it takes a while to understand which group is looking after which piece of the puzzle. Sort of from the AEF side, typically we're investigating things more on a technical level, one step possibly before the actual standardization piece. So we kind of get engineers or people actually wanting to play or wanting to do stuff to kind of see how it works. And then we document those things in AEF guidelines, which then in most cases get passed over to the relevant ISO working group for inclusion in the next standard or enhancement of the next standard. But at the same time, people within AEF project teams, not all of them, but some of them also wear a hat under ASABE or under DIN. So that same person working in an AEF team are also working in the teams that kind of work on the standard as well. So if you like, it's more about participating and sort of, getting to know people and getting to know who's doing what and which, if you like, sector that you sort of want to play in. But once you start entering into this kind of standardization piece, you realize that many people wear more than one hat, and it gives them the awareness of what's going on and which issue to bring up in which particular forum.
And you guys really hit on how startups can look at this ecosystem and understand where to get involved and plug in, right? Because as you mentioned, Mike, it can be overwhelming at times, and there's a lot going on. But this is about the industry coming together and everybody having a seat at the table to raise all tides. But when we look at other folks as well, such as the regulators, we got into the regulatory landscape a little bit, or even the growers, knowing right we've got a diverse group of folks in the audience here. Are there ways for them to get engaged in some of this work as well? And if so, how could they maybe go about doing it?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. Again, going back to the standards work that we're doing and what we're demonstrating here at this event is an ASAB test method to evaluate the performance of precision application technologies. And so when we started that project, obviously, working through standards is usually very industry heavy, and a lot of OEMs involved, and we're kind of working together to solve certain risks that we might have on the market. But to really do this and take advantage of the goals of the project is to update pesticide labels to reflect the use of these types of technologies, is doing the outreach to the regulatory side of things. So, we've been meeting a lot with USDA, getting their engagement on the working group. EPA is engaged on this working group. This morning we had a tour with Cal DPR to try to further that engagement and make sure that they're comfortable with the direction and the data that we're trying to collect, and then how that can be used, with the goal of saying, hey, if we create this industry well-rounded standard with industry, with academia groups, with policymakers, the hope is then that standard could become a regulation. That's something that we can all meet. But again, we're all part of that. We all can have our opinions, put our comments in, and really develop a usable test standard or usable safety standard to not inhibit further innovation, but allow for further growth of innovation is really the overall goals and how we can use these standards. So
I think that's also a pretty good promo for trade associations like the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. Austin, in his role as a moderator or in his role at AEM, he also serves as the secretary of the AEF, right? And so in many cases there is some level of those pieces of the puzzle that are put together in a way to help try and have some coordinated effort in meeting a global need.
Anything to add?
Just to say that, we have the AEM as our secretary within the AEF, so that the AEM knows inherently what's the AEF is working on. At the same time, we have good relations with this CEMA organization in Europe with their technical director. There's a good connection there. So we're sort of maintaining that connection so that, if you like, both organizations know technically what we're doing, but at the same time we can be aware of what might be coming in from the, if you like, regulation side of things.
Right, and then it's outreach at shows like this, right? In the fact that we're here both talking about what we have, but also looking, learning, asking questions, those kinds of things, so then we can think through, how this affects or how this begins to shape the future of our industry as we go from supervised operation to elements of autonomy.
Oh, and I appreciate you mentioning kind of the role that us as a trade association play, right? Because it's all about connecting the dots sometimes, and how do we bring all those perspectives together? Before we go to questions here, I know we're getting close to 12:30 and we're holding people from lunch. Wanted to maybe just give you each an opportunity to kind of wrap up the conversation as to if you could, put one call to action or give one piece of advice to the folks in the room, whether it's a startup, a regulator, a grower, whoever it may be, what would that be? And Andrew, I'll maybe start with you and we'll go down the line.
Okay. So, we've spent all this time talking about standards and obviously there's the regulatory side of things. So if you follow a standard, it might mean that you can sell a product in a certain country. At the same time, standards enable interoperability. And that was kind of, really behind ISOBUS. We really wanted that interoperability. The main focus of the ISOBUS development, it kind of started in Europe, but really it is global. The fact that not all the tractor manufacturers make implements, and especially if you look at Europe, the implements that are made in France are no good for the Germans or the Belgians or the Italians or whatever. So every country was making their own implements, but we needed interoperability. We needed those implements to talk to the tractors. And so Isobus was necessary for that interoperability. So really, for me, I think the message is for the startups that, I mean, it's great. You know, you've got a bunch of brain power, you've got a bunch of money from investors, and you're moving at 100 miles an hour. But if you want to build the perfect self-contained solution, then don't care about standards, don't care about what's going on in the outside world. But I'm sure you'll get to a certain point where whatever you're building needs to communicate, whether it's just to get the data out of your machine, or whether you're actually going, okay, I specialize in this piece, but I need something from there and something from there and something from there. So at some point, you're going to have to search for interoperability with other players in the market. And that's really why you should be paying attention to standards and to industry groups that are working on trying to commonize things and enable interoperability. So yeah, my message is really for startups, please pay attention to this interoperability fact. You'll only get so far down the road if you just kind of work on your closed box.
I guess when I begin to think through your question, I think it through kind of from the grower hat standpoint, right? Because he buys equipment from his local dealer, and it either works or it doesn't. It's really simple, right? And so while he can appreciate all of the thinking and all the great engineering greatness that goes into that product, doesn't care, right? Once he buys it, he owns it, right? And so I would say to those growers is the idea that there is a ton of capabilities in those products. In many cases, your dealer may have trained specialists that can help you access those things. They may or may not, they may be learning along with you. And it's those tractor implement combinations and how those things work. For me, I wouldn't be I wouldn't be doing a service to this panel if I didn't also say data out is becoming an increasingly important part of the puzzle, right? Being able to show that you did use less fuel, being able to show that you did use less fertilizer, and here's the proof, right? And being able to bring those two things together in working with your local dealer and your service provider to have the right combinations that you may have referenced the AEF database. Yep, this works and this works. Or yes, I've worked with my technical specialist and this is how I get there, right? And so when I think it through, I think it through from the grower's perspective today. So that was my thoughts for them. Perfect.
I think the big thing for me is engage, right? Engage with us. You know, you get a part of the standard development groups. You get into, you associate with the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. You start to build those relationships. You can start asking a lot of questions. You can learn a lot from the folks that are developing standards actively today. You know, with kind of where my work is now headed with some of the standards work I'm doing is trying to get more engagement from regulators. To you know, if you look out here today, right, this is kind of the future, right? We're seeing a lot of new technology, and we know that technology is the future. It's going to continue to advance. We have regulations that might be in place today that might inhibit some of that further innovation. So if we can work with us as a group, engage with us, understand what these technologies are capable of, solving not only our customers' problems, that's why we develop new technology, right, to solve those problems, but it can achieve environmental goals, it can achieve the safety goals for our customers, for folks that are going to be using the technology or around the technology. So that's really my purpose, is our point would be to just try to engage with us.
Perfect. And I think, you know, the common theme that we've seen is coming together to better the industry, raise the industry from all different aspects, from the machinery side all the way through to the grower, and then the validating of what we're saying we're doing. Adam, do you have?
And then one shameless plug, if you want to see some standards work that's actually in development with a well-rounded group with academia, OEMs, and policymakers, we have a See and Spray machine set up doing some demonstrations over some standards work that we're doing with Iowa State University. So if you'd like to have more of this conversation, to learn more about some of the work that we're doing, please come on out and take a look.
Always appreciate a shameless plug. All right. So with that, as I mentioned, I know we're getting close to lunchtime here, but wanted to open up to the audience for any questions that anyone may have.
There's one in the back for sure. See
Thank you very much. Very informative. I think, Adam, you mentioned ISO 262. This is a kind of a two-parter, I guess. That is more from the I guess what we call the generic automotive vehicle safety standards. So the first question is, how do you see that affecting or being implemented in autonomous vehicles for agriculture, which are not running in streets?
Correct, yeah.
And then the second part is related, the ISO, I think it's a 43434. It's more of a cybersecurity regulation. And also for Europe right now, that's a related question, it's a generic, is the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act.
Yeah.
So the first part is the safety part. How would that affect the autonomous vehicles in agriculture? And the second part, just a generic overall cybersecurity standards and.
I think I'll defer the cybersecurity probably to Andrew. He's definitely more of an expert in that area than me. The functional safety standard piece, yes, ISO 26262 is the automotive functional safety standard. It's like 9 to 12 parts to the standard. ISO 25119 was the basically 26262 is the parent standard. That's where it all started, and 25119 came into play for agricultural equipment. And so that's the one that we were using for anything ag-related, in-field related, non-roadway type equipment is the standard to utilize. I believe there's 4 parts of that standard, but it is a process standard that requires you to perform a risk assessment on your system, your device, your machine as a whole, and then you work through the standard from there, and that's how you show compliance from a functional safety standpoint.
Okay, and so as far as Europe and the CRA, or Cybersecurity Resilience Act, there's been this kind of battle is the wrong word. There's been this question mark in Europe as to whether, from the cybersecurity point of view, ag equipment should be following another regulation which is called UNECE 155 or the CRA. Thanks to, if you like, this group SEMA that I was talking about, so the equivalent AEM in Europe, thanks to that representation in Brussels, we've kind of got agreement within the industry that the ag industry, so the ag equipment manufacturers, should be following CRA, which is good because it means that it would have been difficult to follow 155, UNECE 155 as well. But in addition to that, we also want to show that we as an ag industry are not sleeping. And so we started working on an ISO standard for cybersecurity for off-road vehicles. And the intention is that will really reutilize elements within CRA, or means that if you comply with this ISO standard when it's released in, I think it's going to be 3 years' time, if you can comply with that standard, then you'll actually be complying to CRA. So there is activity there, and thankfully, again, as an ag industry, we're moving in the right direction, but it's definitely the CRA direction backed up with an ISO standard.
In full disclosure, it was through these kind of interactions last year that both the FBI and the HSA reached out to AEM to be able to do elements of to be able to do elements of cyber assessment, cyber risk and threat assessments specific to the agricultural industry, just so then they can begin to look at what we're doing as an industry to strengthen our cyber resiliency.
Yep. Perfect. Any other questions?
So, Andrew, you guys talked a lot about the importance of engagement between academia, government, regulations, and industry. Is there any upcoming engagement where they're all interacting together that would be very vital for startups and others to participate in?
Yeah, so there's obviously functional safety has come up a couple of times today, and I think that's also, it's a good opportunity if for particularly startups or people working in this, or moving in this autonomous space. it's really good to be more aware of functional safety. What are the current regulations? What are the future regulations coming up? And there is actually a workshop in in Illinois in early December, specifically focused on, how can autonomous systems be safe? And I think the idea with that workshop is it's for startups, it's for growers, it's for anybody that has an interest in understanding and kind of talking about what's going on and what are the things to watch out for. And it's, the 4th to the 6th, I think, of December in Urbana.
In Urbana, yep.
And it's something, it's been set up by the University of Illinois. So that's something kind of slightly, if you like, local. I'm obviously, you can tell from my accent, I'm not from around here, I'm from the other side of the pond, and I don't think I'll be able to come back for December. However, that's something which is going on, which could be of interest for people, again, to, if you like, dip their toes in functional safety, because if you are creating something autonomous and you do want it to be successful, you're going to have to be aware of these standards for functional safety, and at some point you're going to have to know that you can comply with them. So workshops like this are a great initiative to help you, become aware at a really, if you like, low expense.
It's a great starting point as well, right? To start
Fantastic
to figure out
starting
what's
point.
going on.
Yep.
Also, too, I do know in one of the zones, ASABE, it does have a booth here, and there's some folks there that you could talk with, at least get some contact information. Maybe they give you more information on areas you'd want to maybe engage in, but that's probably a good starting point on how to get engaged.
Exhibition hall number 1, when you go in the main door, turn left,
There you go.
and it's on the left-hand wall.
It's like you've been there before. Any other questions before we wrap things up? See, we have one over there. Right.
Thank you. I just wondered, how did you deal with, it seems like there's a lot of variability in the levels of autonomy with some of this equipment. Is that something you dealt with in the standard? And was it pretty easy to kind of clearly define groupings of levels of autonomy, or was that something that you struggled with when you were developing the standard?
Looking at me here.
Yeah.
You can lead.
So, yeah, all transparency, that's not really my area of expertise as far as the development of it, but I have used it a lot with some of our autonomous equipment. There are 3 levels, I know, within the standard. So there is partially automated, semi-autonomous, and full autonomy. So it comes in to play, are you supervised autonomy? Do you have an automated system, or is it truly you place it in the environment within the zone and it operates completely on its own? So it does kind of decipher between those different categories and kind of what the systems in place should look like from a baseline safety performance level. But I do know those are the 3 that are within ISO 18497.
I'll also say, full disclosure, what you brought up and the lack of a common vocabulary is a recognized industry hurdle. And we're actually we've got a dialogue. We don't have anything to talk about today. We don't have any pretty pictures yet, but we're certainly working on elements of how we can all sing from the same handbook as an industry and have a common vocabulary. So then it's not such an alphabet soup and it's not so hard to decipher.
Shameless plug on that. We'll have something for that probably early next year is when we're hoping to have that. Any other questions? All right. Well, we appreciate everybody taking the time today. Please feel free to come up and ask the panelists any questions you may have. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.